Google slide deck, but once more, oh, and the session is being recorded today. The reason we record it is as a part of this entire OTP that we're running at the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology. We are able to then post the video of this session later on so people can review it asynchronously. And I just want to also point out when you're being recorded that it actually, when we're in the breakout rooms having conversations, that part doesn't get recorded. So just a heads up there. And finally, that Google slide deck, we have pasted it in the chat. Make sure that that's open in a separate tab. We will be doing some collaborative group work using the Google slide deck later. All right, so I'll slide past this. We are here to talk about facilitating active peer-to-peer engagement in online spaces. And I'd like to emphasize that we're talking about synchronous peer-to-peer engagement, but we will also be encouraging you to think of asynchronous ways that you can think of peer engagement for your students. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement, and this is kind of different than it is when we're all in person at the university. So UBC Point Grey campus is on traditional ancestral unceded Musqueam territory, but it's quite likely that you are not on the university campus. You might be if you live there, or if you're choosing to go back to work to some extent. But if you're wondering what Indigenous territory that you are residing on, this is a great resource, nativeland.ca. I use it in my own classes, and you can enter your postal code or your address, and it will actually tell you which Indigenous territories you're on. And it will also link you to their individual websites where you can get more information that's more localized. So it's a really nice resource. So this is the point where I introduce myself, and I'll be co-facilitating today with Jens as well. And I come to you wearing a couple of different hats. I got my PhD in education at UBC, and I've been working at the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology. I'm an educational consultant there, so that's what I'm coming to this role as. But I would also say that I'm a sessional instructor and lecturer for the Faculty of Education and the Faculty of Arts. So a lot of what we talk about today, I'll be drawing on my experiences from doing that online. And I'd like to just pass it over to Jens to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Jens. I'm same as Kari. I also wear a bunch of different hats. I facilitate this as part of my capacity as a CTLT educational consultant. I've been working with the CTLT for a few years now, starting as an ISW facilitator. I am also an instructor out at Kwantlen Polytechnic, currently in a non-teaching term, and I'm still finishing up my PhD in experimental medicine. Yeah, until 2 weeks ago, I would have said that my kids might come into the room and sort of interrupt us and just participate in the session. They're back at daycare, which is nice, but just to acknowledge that everyone is dealing with their own personal lives in addition to teaching and learning online. Welcome, everyone.
Great, thanks, Jens. Yeah, not only children entering the room, but I've been enjoying seeing people's dogs and cats as well. That's been a fun part of these sessions. I have a point here of just mentioning that it's important to be compassionate with ourselves and others. This shift for many of us, we're doing face-to-face teaching to being online. You know, we're starting to get the hang of it now, or a lot of people are, but it still isn't what we're used to, and it's still a very steep learning curve. So just acknowledging that, and that circumstances in our homes where we're working from might not be ideal. The focus of our session today is breakout rooms for synchronous peer-to-peer engagement. What I believe that you'll find is that when you're in those breakout rooms, there's not enough time to have the discussions that you want to have. This is sort of like a quick and dirty overview of 3 different activities you can do with breakout rooms. And we encourage you to adjust those based on what works for you and what you're trying to accomplish through the breakout rooms. I would also say one caveat that this is not a technical how-to session for Blackboard Collaborate. There are those resources, and we've put them in one of the last slides of our Google slide deck that you have access to. The Blackboard Collaborate does a much better job of the technicalities than we would. We're here to talk about really techniques you can use pedagogically and as teachers. And at the end of this 60 minutes, we will be having a 30-minute discussion, informal. We're just here to answer questions, or maybe you can share with us some successes that you've had as a teacher or instructor using some of these tools. So I'll move along. The first thing is, you know, there are varying levels of who has been working online over the past few months or even before that. A breakout room overall is, you can think of it as a private conversation space for group collaboration. Each breakout room can be thought about as a separate table or group in your classroom. And I actually had a faculty member say, well, actually, it's not quite like that because you can't just wander around the room and listen in on people's conversations. She said it's more like sending your students in groups outside of the classroom, and you have to leave the room in order to go through. So that's a better metaphor, I think. Every attendee that you put into a breakout room has the role of a presenter, so they can share their screen, their documents, and there's a collaborative whiteboard that they can use and do some jottings on. Some of the drawbacks, there's quite a few. When the breakout room ends, all of the collaborative content that has been created disappears. This is actually, if you're using Zoom instead, which is a very similar platform, Zoom, you can save some of what's created. But if you use breakout rooms in Collaborate, just ask students to take a screenshot of what they've developed if you're wanting to look it over at the end. The other thing is that breakout rooms are difficult to practice as a facilitator because you actually have to have people in your session before you can practice putting people into breakout rooms. If there are a few of us left at the end, we can easily allow you to practice that if you want to stick around. The other thing is that using the breakout rooms with Collaborate can feel a little bit clunky, and what I mean by that is there's not a built-in countdown that explicitly lets people in their breakout rooms know that we're bringing them back to the central room. So I believe that you will find that when we pull you back, it might feel sort of sudden. But we will do our best. We always give 1-minute warnings, and we do that via the chat function. Zoom, I was going to say another strength of Zoom is that it actually has a built-in countdown feature. So it'll show up on their screen in a more obvious place, but we don't have that in Collaborate. And then I would say due to technical instabilities and sometimes just general synchronous teaching issues, we encourage people to use breakout rooms sparingly. They're great for certain synchronous activities, and you can encourage, you can think of ways or similar related ways to use them in asynchronous type spaces, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we are encouraging everybody to be thinking about asynchronous ways they can enhance their teaching as well. Are there any questions so far? I haven't been watching the chat too closely, but if anyone wants to speak up and ask questions, happy to take them. All right, I'm just going to move along. The next thing that I had gestured to this idea of asynchronous. I wanted to mention that one tip for using breakout groups or breakout rooms is to give really clear and detailed instructions. We've found that people work better in these breakout rooms if they know what needs to happen in the breakout group, what the expectations are, and then what might be happening after the breakout group ends. What will they be asked to share and discuss? Another tip is to provide an activity rather than just a discussion question. So sometimes if you offer a discussion question, there can be limited engagement, but if you have some kind of a process that you out for them to go through, a goal to achieve, or some kind of a product to develop together, this is one way to increase student engagement. And finally, Jens and I talked about this last week, but Consider blending and integrating a breakout room with an asynchronous activity. And what we mean by that is that you can give them a problem to solve collectively, and then on their own time, they can talk together in their breakout room of how they're going to do that, but on their own time, they can be doing some other stuff before they come back to work with you in a synchronous environment. So those are a couple of tips for engagement for breakout rooms. Why should we use breakout groups sparingly? That's a great question, and we'll talk more about it. And I think that the main point about breakout rooms is more generally applied to synchronous teaching. We're trying to encourage faculty members to really think about asynchronous ways that they can be teaching. So breakout rooms are quite specific to synchronous teaching. And the reason it can be difficult is if you're having students in different time zones, for example. It can be quite difficult for someone in China to be tuning in if we're at a certain time of day where students need to be, listening to a lecture at a certain time or being in breakout rooms. Yeah, thank you for that question. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Jens to talk about our session outcomes.
Yeah, so during this session, you will have a chance to practice a lot of different features of synchronous active teaching. And so you'll practice being in breakout rooms and collaborate. And in those breakout rooms, you'll share and discuss some strategies that you could use to increase peer-to-peer engagement in those synchronous online learning environment. And again, as Kari said, we will focus on the synchronous spaces here and recommend using synchronous spaces also sparingly. And also discuss adaptability of breakout rooms for achieving some group work and discussion in classes. And just a quick little agenda. So we have 3 activities planned. The last activity might be sort of an asynchronous continuation of our synchronous work. And we'll start out after some large group activities. We'll start out with a think, pair, share, where you will be sent into a breakout room. And then we'll get back, debrief that activity. We'll send you into another breakout room to work on some collaborative slide building and content creation. And after debrief, there might be time for a virtual gallery walk. If we don't get to that, we'll explain what it is, and you get to do that asynchronously at the end of the workshop. And then we do the debrief closing and end with a half hour, up to half an hour of an open discussion, Q&As, and consultation around your specific questions. So to start us out, here we go. We are quite we're a smaller group today, but every one of you will have different levels of experience using on or in online teaching. So we're interested in whether or not you've used active learning in synchronous online contexts before. So just go to the chat function and give us a thumbs up if you did that, or if you haven't used it, give us a thumbs down. Yes, see a lot of thumbs up appearing. Nice. Some thumbs down. So it is a bit of a varied group. It's interesting to see over the month of facilitating the workshop how we started out having lots of thumbs down and then more and more thumbs up, just I guess by virtue of the remote teaching having been going on for 2 months. And it's great, and we're glad to have a group with people that have experienced it and those that didn't, and you will be working together to sort of draw from your own experiences and thoughts. The other thing we're interested in is what size of class you typically teach. And if you teach a wide range of classes, just think about the one that you're mostly focusing on. And I'll be setting up a poll here and just respond to the poll. 1 is 0 to 20, 21 to 50 is 2, 51 to 103, 101 to 249, 4, and over 255. And if you teach classes over 250 participants, you'll realize that Collaborate does not allow breakout rooms anymore. I believe Zoom still does. Collaborate used to not be able to do more than 250. They did allow that now. All right, so I'm still missing 3 responses. I'm just going to show the responses here. Okay, so today we have somewhat more people that are teaching classes between 0 and 50 students. Okay.
And I think that the strategies that we are showing you today do work better in the 0 to 70 range. So there are adaptations you can make and different ways you can think about it with a larger group.
Yes. All right. So after a bit of a warm up in using some of the possible synchronous activities, thumbs up, thumbs down, polls, will get you into Think, Pair, Share. And I'll give you a quick overview of the activity and then I'll give you individual prompts. So we'll start you out with a 1-minute individual quiet reflection. And during that time, Kari will be setting up the breakout rooms. And after the minute, she will send you off into breakout rooms with a partner. And you will have 4 minutes to discuss your prompt. And so we'd like you to now take a 1 minute and reflect on and maybe take some written notes on what are some active learning techniques that you typically use in your face-to-face courses that encourage peer-to-peer engagement and student discussion. Okay, you have another 15 seconds. All right. So now Kari has set up the breakout rooms. Kari, are they ready?
Yeah, so I'll just
Okay.
briefly mention what I'm doing to set up breakout rooms in Collaborate here. So it actually gives you the option of either randomly assigning or manually assigning. What we do for these sessions is randomly assign, and then it asks you how many groups. It does the math for you, so it'll tell you how many groups of 3 if that's the number that you want. So for us today, we are going to be in groups of 2. There will be one group of 3 though, so that'll be group 1. In any case, I am ready when you are, Jens.
Okay, I'll just give the prompt. So when you're in your breakout rooms with your partner and your group of 3, use the reflection you just did and discuss and brainstorm techniques that you either know or hope to be able to adapting, or that you know or hope to adapt to a synchronous online space. Okay, ready to go. 4 minutes.
And we'll give you a 1-minute heads up. Remember that that heads up will be in the chat function, so try to keep an eye on that. All right, I am starting the breakout rooms now.
Okay, welcome back everyone. Welcome back to the main room. You might have seen our warning. You might not have seen it. If you didn't see it, chances are that you did not go back to the everyone chat. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If your students are in a breakout room and they are engaged there, they would have to go back to the top of the chat box and toggle and back to the everyone chat in order to see your messages. You can't send messages to the individual chats. Right. You also might have realized that I muted you all as you came back. That's just another thing to keep in mind. If you use breakout rooms and you send your students back, at the top of the attendee or participant list, there's sort of 3 dots, and you can click mute all. That avoids the kind of ongoing conversations and the chatter as people come back into the main room. All right, so we'll spend some time sharing back. So for this sharing, Kari will be taking notes on the slide deck, so you will have something to take forward, and we'll ask you to share using the audio. If you can't use audio today, you can also share in the chat. We encourage you to use audio. So let's just take maybe 5 minutes to hear some of your ideas of techniques you talked about and how to adapt them, or how to adapt them to a synchronous online space. And you can use the hand raise feature, which is underneath the slides. Yes, Mikey.
Micah, you might have to unmute yourself.
I see Mikey is unmuted. Do you want to say something again, Mikey? I think we might be able to hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
okay. There was just a bit of a backlash, I guess. Okay, so one of the things I would often use are case-based scenarios where groups of students are asked to engage with a specific organization or a company and watch videos and read lots of information. So I'm hoping to still use that in advance and share with the group, and then have them engage in breakout think per share exercises around that material.
Okay. Nice. So you'll provide the material up front for them to read and kind of prepare.
Yes.
And then they would use the breakout to discuss that material. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for sharing, Mikey.
And just so everyone knows, I am annotating this directly into our slide deck, which you will have you do have access to. I'm on slide number 13, and I'm writing it out as people are saying it.
Yes, Ed. What do you talk about?
Ed, we can't hear you. In case you're trying to speak, just make sure your microphone is on.
Ed, you're unmuted in Collaborate, so this might be the microphone of your computer. So if you can't, we still can't hear you. Maybe you can try sharing your insights via the chat function.
We might be having some bandwidth issues. I'm thinking that one thing we can try is if everybody turns off their cameras, we can see if the microphones work better. Sometimes that does help. I'm going to turn off my camera.
I'll turn off my camera as well.
Let's just see if that works. You had problems in your breakout room too. Okay, I haven't encountered this before. So Ed, I'm going to ask you to try to speak again, and this time just try to speak into the mic, and maybe we'll have solved that problem.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you now, Ed.
Yes.
Oh, that's strange. I wonder what happened. Okay, well, one thing I did do is I unplugged my USB and plugged it back in again, but I've never had a problem on Zoom. And in the one time when I taught a grad course of about 120 students, just about a month or two ago, I never had any problems on Collaborate Ultra. But anyway, so what I was going to say is I teach, if I teach a large third-year course of about 200 students, what I often do during the class, in addition to clickers, is I have students do in-class worksheets. So I hand out a paper worksheet, and I ask the students to work in groups of 2 or 3 for about 15 or 20 minutes. And then at the end of class, on the way out the door, they drop their sheet into a box, and we give them participation points. and 2 points if they made a reasonable effort, even if the answers are wrong, and 1 point if it's so-so, and 0 points if minimal effort. How do I replicate that inside Collaborate Ultra? Like, how do they hand something like that in? And do I set up, say, 80 or 70 or 80 groups with 2 or 3 people each? How does that work?
Okay, so did you talk a little bit about how it might work in your breakout group?
I did, but we didn't get to anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead, Jens.
okay, thanks. I mean, we can talk about some more specifics at the end of the session. One thing that I'm thinking kind of spontaneously is you could assign you could guide your students back to Canvas and assign a worksheet within Canvas and use the breakout space for them to discuss and then submit via Canvas. I would encourage you to think about not assigning sort of the time limit at the end of class, but maybe adding another 12 hours just in case students can't join you for whichever reasons, which might be bandwidth issues. And we're experiencing today. So if we had assigned grades today based on your participation, you're speaking up, some of you might not get a grade just because you can't speak up because of your internet. So, you know, that would be a way where you can use the space, your students work through something on Canvas, submit it within Canvas, and those that can't join for whichever reason can do it afterwards. Maybe watch your recording and then work through that on their own time.
Yeah, and that's a great suggestion, Jens. And another thing that I would add, and that I did just this last semester, is I created semester-long conversation groups for students. And I actually, it's not the same as a breakout room, but it's the same concept. But I gave them each their own Collaborate session within Canvas. And they had that link at any time where they could meet one another in that group. And Canvas keeps track of who is in which group. So they're really able to just have access to an online space to chat. And you can do that asynchronously. So let's say you do like a half-hour lecture. Then you can then say, okay, anytime in the next 2 days, you need to get together with your conversation group in Collaborate and answer and discuss this worksheet and then hand it in. So it's not quite the same because it's not happening in that space that you've carved out for class, but it can be more adjustable for larger groups and asynchronous spaces.
With that, you might also then be able to set up groups of students that are within the same time zone, which would accommodate that easier.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Ed. I see we're at 1:36, so I suggest to move forward.
Yeah, let's do it.
To the next activity. And Carrie, I'll pass the torch on to you.
Thanks everyone for your patience. Sometimes we do encounter these problems. It's not often, but it certainly happens. So the next thing we're going to do, I would just ask you to direct your attention over to the Google slide deck. And on that slide deck, I am on slide number 14. So we're on activity 2. I'm just going to explain our task for this activity, and then I'll tell you how we're going to do it. So in groups of 4 to 5 people, we're going to ask you to choose one active learning technique and discuss how you might adapt it to synchronous online teaching. And we'll ask you to take some notes of your brainstorming on your slide. What is often effective for these groups is that you can assign a note taker or a scribe, and then also assign a timekeeper who can keep an eye on the time so that you're not startled when we pull you back to the main room. I'm going to move to slide number 15. That's describing how we're going to do this. So the slides after slide 15, so 16 onward, are for your group work. You'll be assigned to a breakout room and given a group number. So if you are given group number 2, you'll go to the slide that says group 2 on it, for example. And you'll have about 8 minutes for this activity. Again, it won't feel like enough, but it'll give you a sense of what to be in the breakout room and to do some of that collaborative work. And then we'll give you a heads up just through the chat function when we're bringing you back. If you have questions for us, once again, you can type it into the chat and where it says everyone. We sometimes will circle through the rooms just to make sure that everything is okay. I wanted to mention that when you're using breakout rooms, larger groups are more secure in the sense that if anyone is having problems and drops out, there are still people that that group of folks can talk to. But when you're in pairs, it can sometimes be less stable, because if one person drops out of a breakout room with only 2 people in it, then you have one person remaining on their own for a while. So yeah, sometimes as a facilitator, you have to keep track of that more closely when it's only pairs in breakout rooms. All right. So once again, I'll just mention protocols and good habits for learners. Typically, we try to use breakout rooms and small groups to add to this sense of like relational connection. So we do think it's a good idea to briefly introduce yourselves to one another. And if you're comfortable, unmute yourself and stay unmuted. And then if you're comfortable, turn on your camera. Again, there are some equity issues related to, I don't recommend requiring people to turn on their camera, but it's something that is recommended. But I wouldn't ever say that you should tell people they have to. Okay, so how are you doing with creating the groups there, Jens? Great. Okay, so I would direct your attention to slide number 20. And this is where I'm going to annotate some of your feedback. I'd love to hear how this experience went for you. So anyone who's willing to unmute yourself and speak up and let us know, how was the experience? What were your reflections while you're there?
Hi there. I noticed that in our group we had 2 people with video and 2 without. And those with video, you didn't see the name. So basically we had 2 people with pictures and 2 people with names only.
I've heard this critique before of Collaborate. It's definitely like you have to somehow choose between knowing someone's name or seeing their face. That's an unfortunate thing. I think if you hover over it, are you able to then see their name, or does it not work?
Okay. I don't know. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, great. Thanks for that feedback. Anyone else? What was that experience like being in breakout rooms?
It's
oh. Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it took a while for us to get the technology working. I mean, or something was happening. It was reconnecting, so it was making it harder for us to kind of engage. Quite frankly, I find, because I'm using Zoom so much, I find Zoom a lot better than Collaborate Ultra at this point.
So. Yeah, I've heard that feedback as well. And there seems to be, it's tough because Collaborate is convenient in that it's embedded in Canvas. But Zoom is, this same session could be facilitated in Zoom and probably with fewer problems.
Well, what I've heard now is that, is this correct, that Collaborate Ultra is not going to be, the contract was not renewed, so that we may not even be having Collaborate Ultra in the second term, and that Zoom is going to be embedded in Canvas.
I just posted about that in the chat. I don't think a final decision has been made yet, but I think there's more and more rumor about it.
Yeah.
Are there any privacy issues in using something that's not inside Canvas?
Jens, do you want to take that one?
So Zoom itself has been allowed by UBC and is FIPA compliant. I think you should ask your students not to use their real name. But I would refer you to the Zoom and Collaborate sessions for those. So maybe I'd suggest we go back to focusing on the activity itself.
Yeah, we could talk a lot about the pros and cons of Zoom and Collaborate. I think, does anybody want to share what are some of the strategies you came up with in your breakout groups?
Well, we didn't get too far, and what I'm getting disappointed in is we're supposed to be encouraging engagement, right? In other words, we're trying to make it at least, or get it as close to face-to-face as possible. And if for example, I was doing a Collaborate Ultra the other day, and I had about 50 students, and about 2 of them showed their video, and I was talking to 48 gray silhouettes. And so I find this a bit of a sham, in a sense, that we're supposed to be encouraging something close to face, but there's no faces. So it's like I'm talking to a wall. And I'm really quite disappointed with the whole system, actually.
Yeah, there is certainly something lost in those relational connections, and even just being able to read body language, understand how students are engaging with your material. It's difficult for faculty members, certainly. So you mentioned, Robert, that in your group you didn't get too far. Are there other groups that came up with some strategies? All right, Micah, go ahead.
Yeah, so our group had a bit of a discussion in terms of how to prepare written material in advance that students can engage with during the class by using like real-time Google Doc sheets, like we're doing right now, actually, I guess, like assembling that activity we just did. And then another discussion was around how to engage with guest speakers that might be presenting some information about their respective company or organization. In the past, many courses would offer field tours to physical places, and how can we bring that back by having speakers and kind of the environment that that those speakers are embedded in the classroom. So, for example, having the speaker show little videos of their work or their organizations, like somehow make it tangible for students to get that active learning experience visually as well as engaging with speakers.
That's a great point. Thank you, Micah. And I think we lose certain things with, of course, with this new scenario, but there are also things gained. And one of those is that I've noticed that I have more access to having interviews with some of the experts in my field. So I just taught a graduate course, and I was able to conduct an interview that we filmed with 2 of the authors of our required reading. So people in some cases have more time to do things like that. Yeah, so thanks for sharing that, Micah. Any other strategies that people have come up with in your breakout groups?
Not in the breakout groups really, but I'm just thinking about it now, that the problem is always that a lot of attention and focus goes to technical issues. So that goes away from the focus on the material we actually want them to deal with. So I'm getting the feeling that I will try to keep things very simple and use very few tools and keep it as technically unchallenging as possible to allow them to actually focus on what they're trying to learn rather than on something not functioning.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up. Keeping it simple is one strategy. And another thing I would point out is that I've taught 2 classes now since we went to the exclusively online, and I noticed that the technical issues really abound at first, but students really get into a rhythm of knowing what to expect, and that won't ever save you from, like, if Collaborate is having issues or if the internet is cutting it. But I find that a real rhythm gets developed if you do something similar every week. So students have some kind of structure that they know to expect. I think people adjust quite quickly. All right, I saw somebody else's hand went up. Who was that? AJ, go ahead.
It was mine. I was just going to add to that and say that one thing you can do to help combat that too is have a practice session early on. Show them the tools, show them the technology, and in a very low stakes way. And then when you start doing it, quote unquote, for real, they've had some practice.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. So I'm cognizant of time. We only have a few minutes left, and we just wanted to briefly go through what a gallery walk could look like. Jens, would you mind just spending like 1 or 2 minutes explaining what this could look like if you're using breakout rooms or a follow-up to breakout rooms?
Yes, for sure. And so this is a nice segue into kind of bringing your breakout synchronous learning and linking that to some asynchronous activity. So in a gallery walk, typically if you did that in a class, you would have your students create something like a flip chart, and then they would post that around the classroom, and your students would then move through the class and read over each other's contributions, possibly highlight things, take notes, add to them. And so in this virtual space now, you all co-created the Google slide deck, and a virtual gallery walk then would include you looking at each other's contributions, the other slides, and making edits there, bringing in suggestions. So we won't do that within the main time now. We encourage you to come back to the slide deck later and read over each other's contributions.
Yeah, great.
And Nicola, we don't have a CTLT workshop for how to use Google. So that's just the Google slides, similar to PowerPoint slides that we're using here.
Yeah. So I am conscious that we have just 1 or 2 minutes left. Jens, do you mind if we sort of wrap up and invite people to stick around after?
Nope, that would be great. Let's do that.
Okay, so I think I'm going to bypass this slide so that we have time to show you a few of the resources in this slide deck. So again, you do have access to this Google slide deck, and what we've done is collect questions and provide a bunch of answers over time. If you'd like to add your own questions or comments, please feel free to do so. I'll show you down to slide number 26, and we have a number of different resources, fact sheets. These have all been in response to previous sessions we've done here. There is a Blackboard Collaborate Ultra versus Zoom. There's a pros and cons list that has been created. It does sound like people are starting to lean more towards Zoom, but we don't have any confirmation on what direction the university is moving just yet. And then, yeah, there's lots of additional resources. I would also encourage you to check out the other sessions available in our OTP, which I always forget what the OTP stands for. Can you remind me, Jens?
Online teaching program.
Online teaching program. So have a look, and please stick around for the next, we'll be here for 30 minutes. The other thing I'm happy to do is share the course I just finished, which is I can share my screen and show you around in Canvas on my online graduate course if there's interest in that. Otherwise, thank you everybody for attending, and enjoy your day, and good luck with setting up your courses.